A winter's encounter. The bakery, Dulce Esperanza, stood like a beacon of warmth in the heart of a small Vermont town. Every morning, its windows glowed softly against the crisp white snow that blanketed the cobblestone streets, inviting passers-by to step in and savor the scent of fresh bread and pastries. Michael Castillo, the owner, had inherited the bakery from his mother, a legacy of love and resilience. For him, Dulce Esperanza was more than a livelihood. It was a sanctuary, a space where he poured his memories, passion, and heartache. Michael, a sturdy man with kind eyes and a quiet demeanor, opened the bakery every morning at dawn. This particular winter morning, as the sun struggled to peek through a dense, overcast sky, Michael prepared for another day. Snow had piled high overnight, and the air carried a biting chill. Wrapping his scarf tighter around his neck, he stepped outside to shovel the pathway, his breath visible in the frosty air. As he pushed the shovel through the thick snow, something unusual caught his eye. A large, weathered cardboard box sitting just by the bakery's entrance. It was out of place, with damp corners and faint smudges of dirt, as if it had been dragged across the ground. "What on earth?" Michael murmured, setting the shovel aside. He crouched down, hesitating for a moment before carefully lifting the lid. What he saw inside would change his life forever. 4 children, small, frightened, and shivering, huddled together under a threadbare blanket. Their wide eyes darted to Michael, filled with both fear and desperation. The youngest, no older than a year, let out a soft whimper, while the others clung to each other protectively. They were pale from the cold, their breaths shallow and weak. Michael's heart sank. "Oh my God," he whispered. "What are you doing out here like this?" He gently reached out a hand, but the oldest child, a girl of about 5, pulled back instinctively. Her face was streaked with dirt, her expression one of defiance mixed with terror. "It's okay," Michael said softly, his voice steady but full of concern. "I won't hurt you, I promise." After a moment's pause, he stood and looked around the deserted street. The snow-muted town offered no answers, no footprints, no signs of anyone nearby. Michael bent down again, his resolve hardening. "You can't stay out here," he said. Without another word, he carefully picked up the children, one by one, and carried them inside the bakery. Beneath the surface, inside the bakery, warmth wrapped around the children like a comforting embrace, melting away the icy chill clinging to their small bodies. Michael, his hands trembling slightly, fetched the thickest blankets he could find from the back room. He draped one over each child, his mind racing with questions. Who were they? Where had they come from? And most importantly, why had someone left them out in the freezing cold? The oldest girl sat stiffly, watching him with wary eyes. Her face was pale, framed by tangled dark hair that seemed to have gone unwashed for weeks. She clutched the edges of the blanket Michael had given her as though it were her last defense. The other 3 children huddled together, their fragile frames looking far too small for their ages. Michael crouched down to their level, his voice gentle. "Are you hungry?" he asked. The children exchanged glances, hesitant and unsure. Finally, the smallest boy, perhaps around 3 years old, nodded tentatively. Michael smiled, though his heart was heavy. "Wait here. I'll get you something warm to eat." Moving quickly, he prepared small mugs of hot chocolate and soft pastries. The smell of melted butter and cocoa filled the room, mingling with the familiar scent of the bakery. When Michael returned, he placed the food on the table and encouraged the children to eat. "It's okay," he said softly. "No one's going to hurt you here." The youngest, a toddler barely old enough to speak, reached out first, her tiny hands clutching a piece of bread. The others followed hesitantly, their hunger finally overcoming their fear. Michael watched as they ate, each bite seeming to restore a little color to their faces. But even as they warmed up, the tension in the room remained palpable. Michael couldn't ignore the strange symbol sewn onto the children's clothes, a small triangle enclosing a foreign letter that he didn't recognize. It was stitched neatly, as though it were meant to mark them for something specific. He leaned closer to examine it, curiosity and unease mingling in his mind. "What's this?" he murmured, rushing his fingers over the patch. The reaction was immediate. The oldest girl shot up from her chair, her eyes wide with panic. "Don't touch it," she cried, her voice sharp and cracking with fear. Her sudden outburst startled the others, and the toddler began to cry. Michael raised his hands in a gesture of peace. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I didn't mean to upset you." The girl's breathing was ragged, her body trembling. "They'll come," she whispered, almost inaudibly. "If you touch it, they'll come." Michael's stomach twisted. Who's going to come? But the girl didn't answer. Instead, she sank back into her chair, wrapping the blanket tightly around herself, as if trying to disappear. Michael wanted to press further, but the fear in her eyes stopped him. Whoever they were, the thought of them terrified her to the core. As the children settled down, Michael stepped outside to investigate. The street was as quiet as ever, snow falling softly in the dim morning light. There were no footprints except his own, no sign of the person who had left the box. It was as though the children had simply appeared out of nowhere. He returned to the warmth of the bakery, his mind buzzing with questions, unable to shake the feeling that something was very wrong. Michael reached for his phone and dialed Isabel, his closest friend and a detective with the local police department. "Michael, what's going on?" Isabel answered, her voice groggy but alert. "I need you to come to the bakery," Michael said, his words hurried. "It's serious. I found some kids outside this morning." "Kids? What do you mean?" "4 of them. They were left in a box, Isabel. And there's something strange about their clothes, some kind of symbol. I think it might be connected to, I don't know, something bigger." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then Isabel's tone turned sharp. "Stay there. Don't let anyone else near them. I'll be there as soon as I can." Hanging up, Michael looked back at the children. The oldest girl was now rocking the toddler gently, humming a soft, broken tune. Her resilience struck Michael. How, even in her fear, she had taken on the role of protector for the others. Michael knelt beside her. "What's your name, sweetheart?" The girl hesitated, her lips trembling before she whispered, "Lucy." "Lucy," Michael repeated, offering her a reassuring smile. "That's a beautiful name. Do you know where you came from, or how you ended up here?" Lucy's eyes darted toward the window, her voice barely audible. "We ran away. They were going to take us." Michael's heart clenched. Who was going to take you? But before Lucy could answer, the sound of the bakery door opening sent a jolt through the room. Michael turned quickly, his breath catching as a tall man in a dark suit stepped inside. His polished shoes clicked against the floor, and his piercing eyes swept over the room, lingering a second too long on the corner where the children sat. "Good morning," the man said, his voice smooth and deliberate. "I've heard your bakery has the best pastries in town. Mind if I take a look?" Shadows in the light. The man's presence was like a cold draft, cutting through the warmth of the bakery. His every movement was calculated, his demeanor polite yet unnervingly imposing. Michael forced a smile, though his instincts screamed at him to be on guard. "Of course," Michael said, stepping closer to the counter. "What would you like to try? We've just baked some fresh apple turnovers." The man's sharp eyes flicked to the display of pastries before settling back on Michael. "That sounds delightful," he said smoothly. But his attention wasn't on the pastries, it was on the children in the corner. Michael noticed his glance lingering on Lucy, whose small frame stiffened under his gaze. Michael quickly moved to block the man's line of sight. "I'll get one ready for you," he said, heading to the kitchen. His hands trembled slightly as he plated a turnover, his mind racing. This man wasn't here for the pastries. Michael was certain of it. Returning to the counter, Michael handed over the plate, watching as the man carefully took a bite. The stranger's every action seemed deliberate, as if he were testing the air, waiting for something to reveal itself. "Delicious," the man said finally, dabbing at his mouth with a napkin. "You've got a real talent." "Thank you," Michael replied, his tone steady despite the unease building inside him. "It's a family recipe." The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You must get a lot of customers here, especially in a cozy town like this." "We do," Michael replied cautiously, though mornings are usually quieter. The man's gaze sharpened. "I imagine it's also a safe place. Perfect for hiding things, don't you think?" Michael's stomach twisted. "I'm not sure what you mean." The man leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "You see, I'm looking for something, or rather someone. 4 children, to be precise. I've heard they might have been seen around this area." Michael's breath caught, but he kept his expression neutral. "Children?" he asked, feigning confusion. "I can't say I've seen any unusual activity." The man studied him for a moment, then nodded as if satisfied. "Well, if you do happen to see or hear anything, I trust you'll let the authorities know." "Of course," Michael said, forcing a smile. "It's always best to keep the town safe." The man placed a crisp bill on the counter and turned to leave. But as he reached the door, he paused, looking back. "Oh, one more thing, if you see anyone wearing this." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a photograph. It was of the strange triangular symbol stitched onto the children's clothes. "You should be very careful. It's connected to, let's just say, some dangerous people." Michael's heart pounded as he nodded, hiding the fact that he recognized the symbol all too well. "Thanks for the warning." The man's smirk widened slightly before he walked out, his polished shoes crunching the snow outside. Michael's eyes followed him as he climbed into a sleek black car parked just down the street. The engine roared to life, and the car disappeared around the corner. Back inside, Michael's hands shook as he locked the door. Isabel's warning echoed in his mind. They'll do anything to cover their tracks. He turned to the children, who were now huddled together, their fear palpable. Lucy's wide eyes met his. "Mister," she whispered, "he's one of them." Michael crouched down in front of her, his voice firm but calm. "You're safe here, Lucy. I won't let anyone take you." Lucy looked uncertain, but she nodded, clutching the edges of her blanket tightly. The other children stayed silent, their small faces pale and drawn. Michael grabbed his phone and called Isabel. She picked up almost immediately. "Isabel," he said, his voice low. "He was just here." "Who?" Isabel asked sharply. "A man, tall, polished, wearing a suit. He came in asking about the children. He knew about the symbol." Isabel cursed under her breath. "Michael, you need to be careful. If they know the children are there, you're in real danger." "I know," Michael said, "but I can't let them take these kids. They're terrified, Isabel. Something horrible happened to them." "I'm working on it," Isabel promised. "I've already flagged the symbol as part of an international trafficking ring. We're pulling every thread we can. But listen to me. You need to keep a low profile. Don't let anyone else near the bakery. And don't let those kids out of your sight." Michael nodded, though Isabel couldn't see him. "Got it." As he hung up, he realized the bakery had never felt so vulnerable. The cozy warmth that once filled the space now seemed fragile, as though it could be shattered at any moment. He looked out the window, scanning the quiet street for any sign of the black car, but it was long gone. That evening, after closing the bakery, Michael moved the children upstairs to the storage room. He had cleared the space earlier, making it as comfortable as possible with thick blankets and soft pillows. The children seemed hesitant at first, but Lucy guided them, her quiet strength evident even in her fear. Once they were settled, Michael sat down beside Lucy. "Do you trust me?" he asked. Lucy nodded slowly. "I think so." "Good," Michael said, "because I need you to help me keep everyone safe. If anyone strange comes around, you must stay hidden. Can you promise me that?" Lucy hesitated before nodding again. "I promise." Michael smiled, though his heart was heavy. "Thank you. Now, Get some rest." As the children drifted off to sleep, Michael sat by the window, staring out into the snow-covered night. The streets were silent, but he knew better than to trust the stillness. Somewhere out there, shadows were moving, closing in on his little bakery. But Michael had made a promise to protect these children no matter the cost, and he intended to keep it. A flicker of hope. The night was oppressive, the kind that wraps around a person and amplifies every sound, every shadow. Michael sat by the window of the small upstairs room, his eyes scanning the deserted street below. The children were asleep, their breaths soft and rhythmic, but Michael's mind refused to rest. The stranger's words lingered in his ears like a haunting melody. "You should be very careful." The bakery's once cheerful warmth now seemed like a flickering candle in the vast darkness. Michael's resolve to protect these children, however, burned brighter than his fear. They needed him, and he wasn't about to let them down. His phone buzzed on the table, shattering the silence. Michael grabbed it quickly, careful not to wake the children. It was Isabel. "Michael," she said, her voice urgent, "we've identified the man who visited you. His name is James Keller. He's a known operative in a trafficking ring we've been investigating for years. We suspect he's high-ranking, which makes him dangerous." Michael clenched his jaw. "He was here, Isabel. In my bakery. He knows something." "That's why you have to be cautious," Isabel said firmly. "I'm sending officers to patrol the area, but we can't move openly yet. We need evidence, something that links Keller to the organization. Until then, keep the children safe and stay vigilant." "I will," Michael promised. "But Isabel, these kids, they're terrified. Whatever they've been through, it's unimaginable." "I know," Isabel replied, her tone softening, "and I promise we'll do everything we can to help them. But right now, you're their lifeline. Don't let your guard down." The call ended, leaving Michael alone with the heavy weight of responsibility. He looked over at the children. Lucy had curled up protectively around the youngest, her small arms draped over the toddler like a shield. Michael's heart ached at the sight. The next morning, Michael woke to the sound of cautious footsteps. He opened his eyes to find Lucy standing by the window, her tiny figure silhouetted against the pale light of dawn. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked gently, sitting up. Lucy shook her head without turning around. "They're still watching," she whispered. Michael joined her at the window. Sure enough, a sleek black car sat parked at the end of the street, its tinted windows gleaming in the morning light. It hadn't been there the night before, but its presence was unmistakably deliberate. "They won't come in here," Michael said, trying to reassure her. "I won't let them." Lucy looked up at him, her eyes wide and uncertain. "They always come. They always find us." Her words sent a chill through Michael, but he refused to show it. Instead, he placed a hand on her shoulder. "Not this time, Lucy. Not while you're here." Michael decided it was time to take action. After serving a few loyal customers downstairs and ensuring everything appeared normal, he called Isabel again. "They're watching the bakery," he said. "A black car. Tinted windows. It hasn't moved." "I'll send someone to check it out," Isabel replied. "But Michael, be prepared. If Keller thinks those kids are here, he won't back off easily." Michael sighed, his eyes drifting to the children playing quietly in the corner. "I'm prepared for whatever comes." Later that afternoon, while the children napped, Michael found Lucy sitting at the table, a worn crayon clutched in her hand. She was drawing on a scrap of paper he'd given her earlier. "What are you working on?" Michael asked, kneeling beside her. Lucy hesitated, then slid the paper toward him. The drawing was crude but unmistakable. A group of children, small and huddled together, surrounded by towering, shadowy figures. In the corner, a triangle with a strange symbol loomed like a warning. "This is where you came from?" Michael asked softly. Lucy nodded, her lips trembling. "They kept us in a big room. There were lots of kids. They made us do things we didn't want to do." Michael's chest tightened, Did you ever see anyone who could help? Police? Anyone? Lucy shook her head. If anyone came, they were scared of the men. No one helped. Michael fought to keep his anger in check. These children had been failed by the world, but he would not fail them. You don't have to go back there, he said firmly. Not ever. Lucy looked at him, tears welling in her eyes. You promise? I promise, Michael said, his voice unwavering. That evening, as the bakery closed, Michael received another call from Isabel. Her tone was grave. Michael, we've confirmed that the car belongs to Keller's men. They're monitoring the bakery, but they haven't made a move yet. We believe they're waiting for the right moment. What do I do? Michael asked, gripping the phone tightly. Keep the children out of sight, Isabel instructed. I've arranged for a safe house, but we need to move carefully. We'll transfer them tomorrow night when it's dark. Michael nodded, though his nerves were frayed. And if they try something before then you call me immediately, Isabel said. Michael, you're not alone in this. We'll get through it. That night, Michael moved the children upstairs again, barricading the door with whatever he could find. The bakery, once a haven of warmth and comfort, now felt like a fortress under siege. Lucy sat beside him as the others slept. What if they come tonight? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Michael placed an arm around her shoulders. If they do, they'll have to get through me first. Lucy looked up at him, her small face etched with fear and something else. Hope. For the first time, she allowed herself to lean against him, trusting his promise. As the hours dragged on, Michael kept watch by the window, his eyes fixed on the black car. It didn't move, but its presence was a constant reminder of the danger they faced. Still, Michael's resolve hardened. No matter what came, he would protect these children. He had made a promise, and he intended to keep it. The turning point. The bakery lay in an uneasy silence, the kind that amplifies every creak of the floorboards and every rustle of the wind. Michael sat in the small upstairs room, his eyes heavy from a sleepless night, but his senses sharp. The children were asleep, their breaths steady and soft, but Lucy sat beside him, her eyes fixed on the darkened window. They'll come, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Michael placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Not tonight. Not while I'm here. The words were meant to comfort her, but deep down, Michael wasn't sure. The black car had stayed parked down the street all night, its shadow a constant reminder of the danger that lurked nearby. He felt like a man walking a tightrope over a chasm, every step fraught with risk. By morning, the car was gone. The children stirred awake, their small faces reflecting the innocence of youth, unaware of the weight pressing down on Michael. As he prepared breakfast, simple toast and warm milk, he tried to keep the mood light. You're going to help me bake today, Michael said, forcing a smile. We'll make cookies, lots of them. Chocolate chip, cinnamon, anything you like. Lucy looked skeptical, but nodded. Can we eat some? Michael laughed. You'll be the first to try them. For a moment, the kitchen filled with something resembling normalcy. Lucy helped knead the dough, her small hands mimicking Michael's movements, while the younger children laughed as they played with bits of leftover flour. The smell of baking cookies filled the room, a brief respite from the tension outside. But the illusion of peace was shattered when Michael glanced out the window and saw another unfamiliar car pull up. This one wasn't black. It was a nondescript gray sedan. But the sight of it set Michael's nerves on edge. Lucy, he said softly, his tone suddenly serious. Take your siblings upstairs. Quickly. Lucy's eyes widened, but she obeyed, herding the younger children toward the stairs. Michael watched until they were out of sight, then moved to the front of the bakery. The bell above the door jingled as a man stepped inside. This man was different from Keller. He was older, with graying hair and a calm demeanor, but there was something unsettling about his presence. He wore a plain brown coat, the kind that wouldn't draw attention, and carried a briefcase in one hand. "Good morning," the man said, his voice polite but clipped. "Are you the owner?" "I am," Michael replied, keeping his tone neutral. "What can I do for you?" The man glanced around, his eyes lingering on the counter where trays of fresh cookies were displayed. "I'm looking for someone. A group of children, to be exact. Have you seen anyone unusual around here?" Michael's heart pounded, but he kept his expression steady. "I can't say I have. It's been a quiet week." The man smiled faintly, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I see. Forgive me for asking, but I've been told this bakery is popular. A place where people feel safe. Perhaps too safe." Michael bristled at the implication. "We're a bakery," he said firmly. "People come here for bread, not trouble." The man's smile faded. "I hope that's true, Mr. Castillo. Because if you were hiding something, or someone, it would be very unfortunate for you." Michael felt the threat beneath the words, but he refused to flinch. "Is that all you came to say? Because if you're not buying anything, I'd like to get back to my customers." The man's eyes narrowed, but he nodded. "Of course, I wouldn't want to take up more of your time." With that, he turned and left, the bell above the door jingling again. Michael watched as he climbed into the gray sedan and drove away, but the knot in his stomach didn't loosen. Later that afternoon, Isabel arrived at the bakery. She was dressed casually, blending in with the customers, but her sharp eyes missed nothing. "Michael," she said quietly, pulling him aside, "I just got word. That man who visited you, his name is Bernard Gaines. He's a lawyer for Keller's organization. If he's involved, it means they're building a case, or a cover story." Michael frowned. "A cover story for what?" "To explain why they're targeting you," Isabel said. "If they can't intimidate you, they'll try to discredit you, make it look like you're hiding the children for the wrong reasons." Michael felt a surge of anger. "They'll smear me just to protect themselves." "They've done worse," Isabel said grimly. "But listen, this is bigger than you or me. If we can catch Keller and Gaines in the act, we'll have the evidence we need to bring them down." "How?" Michael asked. "They're careful. They don't leave traces." Isabel's expression hardened. "They're careful, but not infallible. We've planted a tracker on the black car. The next time they make a move, we'll follow them." Michael nodded, though the idea of waiting for Keller to act left him uneasy. "And the kids, what happens to them?" "They'll be moved to a safe house tonight," Isabel said. "But until then, you need to stay vigilant. Don't let anyone near them." As night fell, the bakery felt like a fortress once more. Michael stayed by the window, his eyes scanning the quiet street. The children were upstairs, their soft murmurs and occasional giggles a reminder of why he was doing this. At midnight, a car engine rumbled in the distance. Michael tensed as a pair of headlights appeared at the end of the street. It was the black car again, and this time, it didn't stop. It crept closer, the engine idling just outside the bakery. Michael's phone buzzed. It was Isabel. "They're making their move," she said. "Stay inside. Don't open the door for anyone. My team is en route." Michael hung up and locked the doors, his heart racing. He glanced upstairs, where Lucy peeked down from the staircase, her face pale with fear. "It's okay," Michael said, his voice steady. "We're safe. Just stay up there." But as the minutes ticked by, the tension grew unbearable. The car remained outside, its presence a silent challenge. And then, just as Michael thought he couldn't take it anymore, the doorbell rang. A battle in the shadows. The soft chime of the bakery's bell felt deafening in the silence of the night. Michael froze, his breath caught in his chest. The knock that followed was measured and deliberate, neither hurried nor hesitant. It was the knock of someone who knew they were expected, someone who wanted to be heard. Michael's hand instinctively tightened around the rolling pin he had grabbed earlier. He glanced at the staircase where Lucy crouched, her wide eyes peering down at him. He gave her a small nod, silently reassuring her, though his own nerves were fraying. The knock came again, louder this time. Michael stepped cautiously toward the door, but stopped just short of opening it. "Who's there?" he called, his voice firm. A pause. Then a voice, smooth, polite, and unnervingly familiar. "Good evening, Mr. Castillo. I believe we met yesterday. May I come in?" It was James. Michael's grip on the rolling pin tightened. "We're closed." "That's unfortunate," James said, his tone laced with mock regret. "I was hoping to have a word. It's rather important, you see." Michael's heart pounded, but he didn't respond. Instead, he inched toward the window, peeking out through a small crack in the curtain. The black car was parked directly in front of the bakery, and James stood alone on the doorstep, his hands casually tucked into the pockets of his coat. But Michael knew better than to trust appearances. If James was here, his men weren't far behind. "Mr. Castillo," James called again, his voice taking on an edge of impatience. "I don't enjoy being ignored. It's impolite. Why don't you let me in, and we can discuss this civilly?" Michael's thoughts raced. He couldn't let James inside. It would put the children in immediate danger, but keeping him outside risked escalating the situation. Taking a deep breath, Michael called out, "I have nothing to say to you. Please leave." Silence followed. Michael's stomach twisted as he waited for James's response. When it finally came, it was calm and chilling. "You're making this more difficult than it needs to be, Mr. Castillo. I know what you're hiding, and so do my associates. If you cooperate, we can resolve this quickly and painlessly. But if you don't..." James let the threat hang in the air. Michael glanced at his phone. Isabel's team had to be close. He just needed to buy time. "I'm not hiding anything," Michael said, forcing his voice to remain steady. "And if you don't leave, I'll call the police." James chuckled softly, the sound muffled through the door. "Oh, Michael, I think we both know that won't scare me. But since you insist on being difficult..." The sound of approaching footsteps made Michael's blood run cold. Through the window, he saw 2 more men emerging from the shadows. They weren't dressed in suits like James. Instead, they wore dark clothing, their faces partially obscured by hats. One of them carried a crowbar. Michael's heart raced. He darted back to the staircase, where Lucy was waiting. "Take your siblings," he whispered urgently. "Go to the back room and lock the door. Don't come out until I say it's safe." Lucy nodded, her small face pale with fear, but she didn't hesitate. She gathered the younger children, who had been quietly playing, and ushered them toward the back room. Michael waited until he heard the soft click of the lock before returning to the front of the bakery. The knocking had stopped, replaced by a new sound: the scrape of metal against the doorframe. They were trying to force their way in. Michael's phone buzzed in his pocket. He answered it quickly, his voice low. "Isabel, where are you?" "We're 5 minutes out," Isabel said. "What's happening?" "They're trying to break in," Michael said, his pulse pounding. "It's James, and he's not alone." "Michael, listen to me," Isabel said firmly. "Barricade the door. Don't let them in. My team is coming, but you need to hold them off." Michael hung up and immediately pushed a heavy display case against the door. It wasn't much, but it would buy him some time. He grabbed a small wooden chair and wedged it under the doorknob, bracing it as best he could. The banging grew louder, more forceful. Michael's arms shook as he pressed against the barricade, trying to keep it in place. He could hear James's voice on the other side, calm and commanding. "Mr. Castillo, you're being very unwise. Open the door now, and I promise no one will get hurt." Michael didn't respond. His mind was focused on one thing: keeping the intruders out long enough for Isabel's team to arrive. The door groaned under the pressure, the sound of splintering wood filling the air. Michael knew he couldn't hold them off forever. He grabbed a frying pan from the kitchen and positioned himself near the door, ready to defend the children if the barricade failed. Outside, the sound of sirens suddenly pierced the night. James's voice grew sharper. "Pull back. Now." The banging stopped abruptly. Michael peeked through the curtain and saw the black car speeding away, its tires kicking up snow. The gray sedan followed close behind, disappearing into the darkness. Moments later, Isabel and her team arrived. She burst into the bakery, her eyes scanning the room. "Michael, are you okay?" "I'm fine," Michael said, his voice shaky. "But they almost got in." Isabel nodded, her jaw tight. "We've got units pursuing them. We'll catch them, Michael. I promise." Michael exhaled, the tension in his body finally releasing. "The kids are upstairs. They're safe." Isabel placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You did good, Michael. You kept them safe." But as Michael looked around the bakery, now marked with signs of the struggle, he knew this wasn't over. James and his men would be back. And next time, they wouldn't leave so easily. A new dawn. The following days brought a flurry of activity to the small town. Isabel's team worked tirelessly, following every lead and piecing together evidence against James Keller and his organization. Michael's bakery, once a haven of comfort and simplicity, had become a fortress of vigilance. Though the children were safe for now, Michael knew their journey was far from over. The night of the break-in had left scars, not just on the bakery's wooden door, now hastily repaired, but on Michael's heart. The fear in Lucy's eyes as she looked to him for protection was something he would never forget. It strengthened his resolve, but it also made him question the deeper meaning behind everything he had experienced. One evening, as the bakery sat empty after hours, Isabel stopped by. She carried a thick folder in her arms, her expression a mix of exhaustion and triumph. "We've got him," she said, setting the folder on the counter. "James Keller has been arrested, along with several of his associates. The evidence we collected, thanks to your tip-off, and their own arrogance, was enough to take them down." Michael let out a long breath, a wave of relief washing over him. "What happens now?" "The children will be moved to a secure location," Isabel said gently. "There's a family services unit that specializes in helping kids who've been through this kind of trauma. They'll get the care they need." Michael nodded, but his heart sank at the thought of saying goodbye. He had grown attached to the children, especially Lucy, whose quiet strength had inspired him. Will I ever see them again?" he asked hesitantly. Isabel smiled softly. "That's up to them. But Michael, you've done more for them than most people ever could. You gave them hope when they had none." The day the children were moved, the bakery felt heavier than usual. Lucy stood by the door, her small hand clutching Michael's. The younger children, now more lively and playful, hugged his legs, their laughter bittersweet. "Are you sure we have to go?" Lucy asked, her voice trembling. Michael knelt in front of her, his hands resting gently on her shoulders. "You're going to a place where people can help you heal, Lucy. You'll be safe there, and you'll have a chance to be a kid again." Tears filled Lucy's eyes. "But I don't want to leave you." Michael's own eyes grew misty, but he smiled. "You'll always have a place here, Lucy. Dulce Esperanza isn't just a bakery. It's your home too." Lucy hugged him tightly, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. When she finally pulled away, Michael pressed something into her hand. A small charm shaped like a heart. "Keep this with you," he said. "Whenever you're scared, remember that someone out there cares about you." Lucy nodded, her grip on the charm firm. "I won't forget you, Mr. Michael." As Isabel led the children to the waiting car, Michael watched from the doorway, his heart both heavy and full. He waved until the car disappeared down the snowy road, leaving the bakery in quiet solitude once more. The lesson of Dulce Esperanza. The days that followed were quieter, but not empty. The bakery became a symbol of resilience and hope for the town. Word spread about Michael's bravery, and customers came not just for pastries, but for the inspiration his story brought. Michael found himself reflecting on the events often, wondering why those children had been left on his doorstep. Over time, the answer became clear. The world can be a dark place, But even in the darkest moments, small acts of kindness can ignite change. The lesson was simple yet profound. We may not be able to fix the whole world, but we can make a difference in the lives we touch. For Michael, that difference was enough to give him purpose. One crisp spring morning, as Michael prepared a new batch of pastries, the bell above the door jingled. He looked up, his heart skipping a beat. Standing there was Lucy, now dressed in bright, clean clothes, her smile radiant. "I told you I wouldn't forget," she said, holding up the small charm he had given her. Michael's face broke into a grin as he walked toward her. "Welcome home, Lucy." And in that moment, Michael knew that Dulce Esperanza wasn't just a place for baking bread. It was a place where hope could rise. The story teaches that acts of courage and kindness can ripple outward, changing lives in ways we may never fully understand. Even in the face of overwhelming odds, standing up for what's right can create a brighter future for those in need. This concludes the story. Thank you for watching until the end. I hope you found it enjoyable. If you did, please consider liking the video and sharing it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell for more captivating stories. Have a great day.